When profit comes before safety, disaster is inevitable. Unfortunately, it is usually innocent people who suffer the most. Thursday, November 21st, 2013, is yet another working day in the North European country of Latvia. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, most people head home. A common stop is the Maxima shopping center in the western suburbs of Riga. It houses one of the newest and largest supermarkets and is known for one peculiar occurrence. Now and then, a false fire alarm rings out in the store. During construction, a faulty system was installed and is causing disturbances for the tenants. Today, it sounds once again at 4:21 p.m. Already accustomed to the howling sound, supermarket staff pays little attention to it, a feeling customers share as well. For security reasons, one of the employees goes down to the basement to check it out, and as many times before, it turns out it was a false alarm. Even though there is no fire threat in sight, danger lurks above everyone's heads. 1 hour and 20 minutes after the alarm, the roof caves in on the crowded store. It is peak shopping hour, the worst possible time for a disaster. The roof collapse killed 51 people and injured 41 more. The fire alarm that everyone ignored turned out to be the precursor of the tragedy. 2 years before, in 2011, the opening ceremony of the Maxima shopping center celebrated a new era in the city's urban planning. The building was presented as a new design concept, striving beyond the usual decorated box shape. It consisted of a 51,100 square foot shopping area, of which the supermarket occupied most. In the autumn of 2013, work on adapting the shopping center's roof started, which included a green area and playground. At the same time, an underground garage for the residents was being built. The works were carried out by the same construction company, Riga. During construction, the Maxima Center operated full-time. As customers swarmed through the center, builders worked unnoticed above their heads and below their feet. There was no reason to believe that the building could collapse at any moment. Before the false fire alarms became common at the center, there was a case when a fire broke out and endangered the entire project. Several months before the grand opening, a blaze started in the supermarket. Luckily, the incident ended without casualties, and even though the fire made noticeable damage to the building, engineers claimed there was no structural impact. It was the first and last time an incident of such scale happened at the Maxima Center. For the next 2 years, false fire alarms sounded countless times, but there was never even a spark. Over time, everyone got used to it, and it became a trademark of the center. Nevertheless, the guard had to follow the procedure that called for the alarm to be checked before an evacuation order was given. While the guard is making his way to the basement, I want to tell you about Magellan TV, the documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers. They have the most varied history content available anywhere, covering ancient to modern history, science, space, and most importantly, disaster documentaries. I just finished watching the Osaka train wreck episode. It's an in-depth breakdown of a disaster that shook Japan. A busy commuter train derails and crashes through an apartment building. I found it really worth watching, and there's a lot more to see. In fact, you can choose from over 3,500 hours of full-length documentaries, and 15 to 20 new episodes are added every week. And you can stream on your TV, laptop, or mobile device for just $4.99 per month. Dark History viewers get the first month for free, so you can watch the Osaka train wreck and the rest of their extensive collection of history content. Click the link in the description to start your free month of documentaries. Thanks for supporting the channel. And now, back to the Maxima Center. Only a group of construction workers were engaged in building the garage. There was no trace of a fire. The Maxima staff later stated during the investigation that they always believed the dust from the construction works was activating the fire alarm, which was a possibility. Once the guard determined the alarm was false, he reported the case to the fire protection operator. The shoppers in the supermarket were informed there was no fire. The store would continue to operate as usual. It was 5:41 p.m., 1 hour and 20 minutes after the alarm, when the sound of background music and the shopping carts was interrupted by a loud bang. A large portion of the roof smashed down with all its weight. As later claimed by the survivors, there was no indications of the ceiling cracking or anything else to warn them of the incoming collapse. Everything happened within seconds. Those inside the supermarket had no chance of escaping. Outside the center, a massive cloud of dust mixed with glass shards burst through the front colonnade, sending the people out in front into a panic. The roof's collapse made it look as if an explosion had gone off inside. Only once the dust cloud settled did the disaster's scope become obvious. More than half of the roof was missing. Its sidewalls, the front colonnade, and the residential building were still standing. While the people outside were screaming in horror, inside the center, a strange, deadly silence reigned. The pile of steel and concrete covered most of the supermarket and everyone inside it. Just 5 minutes after the roof collapsed, Riga's State Fire and Rescue Service Department received an emergency call. The roof of the shopping center at 20 Predane Street in the neighborhood of Zolitūde collapsed and buried dozens of people. 7 fire engines rushed toward the disaster site. Under several tons of rubble, an unknown number of people were buried. Some roof structures were so large they could only be moved by special machinery. The scale of the tragedy called for more workforce. By 7 p.m., 100 firefighters and 18 fire engines were thrown into action to save the survivors from the shopping center ruins. The firefighters were organized into 4 teams, each led by a responsible officer. The job they were tasked with wouldn't be easy. The firefighters were worried that the roof could collapse if they didn't find survivors quickly, and they were right. With the rescue operation in full swing, at 7:04 p.m., a part of the still-standing roof above one of the rescue workstations gave way. The construction collapsed suddenly, in the same manner as before. Again, there were no warning signs. What's more, the firefighters inspected the load-bearing structures before setting up the site and found no visual defects. 3 firefighters were killed in the second collapse. However, the tragedy didn't stop their colleagues from continuing the rescue operation. By the end of the day, 92 more firefighters were engaged in the rescue operation, as well as 100 soldiers of the Latvian army. Powerful cranes were brought in for the removal of heavy chunks of concrete. In addition, the Latvian State Police and the State Border Guard arrived with search dogs to help locate the survivors. They worked tirelessly through the night to rescue as many victims as possible. It turned out that the operation was more complex than everyone envisioned. The scent of spilled alcohol and household chemicals from the supermarket impeded the dogs from locating the people. So, instead of dogs, the firefighters started using thermal cameras to find the trapped shoppers by detecting their body heat. Unfortunately, the attempt quickly hit an obstacle, as thermal imaging was impossible to scan under areas of more than 8 inches of concrete. For 2 whole days, the rescue team struggled to locate and excavate victims. Sadly, there were more bodies to recover than survivors to rescue. As crews went deeper into the ruins, almost all recovered victims had sustained severe injuries, meaning the chances of finding more survivors were close to none. On November 23rd, 2 days later, another part of the roof collapsed. The rescue operation was then called off. After 48 hours of searching, all workstations were removed from the site. As the rubble was cleared, no new bodies were found. The final death toll of 51 people was made up of customers, employees, and 3 firefighters. 41 people sustained injuries, many in critical condition. Among the injured was the security guard who had reported the false fire alarm before the disaster. Now that the rescue crew and recovery operation was over, it was time to see if the alarm had anything to do with the collapse. The truth was about to be revealed. On the day of the disaster, the police had already begun investigating the cause. They based their case on a suspicion that state construction regulations were violated and that the building was not built to code. The way the roof had fallen during the rescue operation hinted that poor roof-carrying construction could have caused the collapse. The investigators also wanted to discover why people were not evacuated after the alarm sounded. The entire nation was stunned by a tragedy, the largest one since the country regained its independence in 1991. The Latvian president, Andris Bērziņš, called the tragedy a murder and promised that the authorities would get to the bottom of it. He insisted that all involved in the construction became subjects of investigation. Everyone was to be questioned, the architects who designed the building and the contractors who built it, to the city authorities and responsible supervision bodies. The police assembled a team of leading construction experts to assist. Based on the initial inspection of the site, they drew up 3 possible scenarios. Firstly, there was a suspicion of violations of architectural design and construction supervision standards. Second, the shopping center's construction regulations might have been violated during its first construction phase. Thirdly, the recent upgrades to the building caused the disaster. Due to the risk of further collapse, the investigation began in April 2014, months after the disaster took place. Only once the remaining construction was reinforced were investigators allowed to enter the ruins of the Maxima Center. They conducted a series of controlled collapses of the roof remnants and several controlled fires. The goal was to see if the 2011 fire could have weakened the building structure and if the construction was strong enough to hold the roof. During the tests, inspectors noticed one peculiar thing. The steel support structures deformed well before the target weight stress was reached. That meant only one thing: the load-bearing structure was not built properly. With the insight into official records provided by all parties involved in building the shopping center, the investigators revealed the chain of events that led to the disaster. In late 2009, the architectural firm Cubs submitted the building design for implementation. The construction project was led by structural engineer Ivar Sergets. The construction board accepted the concept and Sergets drafted the drawing for the building. He closely followed the architect's idea, but made one slight yet significant modification. Instead of single-piece steel trusses, Sergets replaced each with 2 shorter ones for easier transportation. He failed to see that, in this manner, he significantly reduced the load-bearing capacity of the construction. The weight of the roof was held by the trusses, but only by the joints between them. Additionally, a more detailed inspection revealed an improper arrangement of the bolts on joints, and it turned out the bolts used were not even designed for joining trusses for the roof. The structure held for 2 years, but when construction of the garden began, the load capacity increased, and joints holding the trusses ultimately gave in. In support of the scenario, the security video that captured the incident showed the roof collapsed exactly at these points. Astonishingly, nobody in the chain of construction and supervision noticed the serious structural mistake. The investigators were eager to know if the oversight was made on purpose. They were right. This is what they discovered. On February 28, 2011, 4 people signed the Construction Acceptance Act, a vital piece of construction documentation. Without one, the building of the shopping center would never have been started. The act was signed by Riga's manager, construction supervisor, construction engineer Ivar Sergets, and Andreas Kushovs from Vicom, the subcontractor that built the trusses. Shockingly, it was later discovered that the owner of another subcontractor that assembled the trusses forged Andreas Kushovs' signature to avoid hiring a civil engineer. This cost-cutting and violation of construction regulations cost 51 people their lives. Several years before the disaster, due to a shortage of funds, the government shut down the state construction inspection, handing the duty over to local governments. Unfortunately, not long after, for the same reasons, the Riga City Council eliminated the local construction supervision department. This meant that when the Maxima shopping center construction started in 2011, there was no official body to supervise it. It is believed that the local government made the decision not only for cost-cutting reasons, but also to facilitate the numerous construction projects implemented in Riga. The country was recovering from the 2008 financial crisis, and the construction industry was important in that process. However, the lack of supervision created chaos. After the disaster, the Riga Construction Board inspected more than 200 public buildings and found certain problems in 31 of them. The only one to resign in response to public resentment was Prime Minister Dombrovskis. The government intended to show the nation that it would improve. A series of laws and subordinate regulations were brought to regulate the organization of construction works and the responsibility of those who conduct them. Meanwhile, for a year and a half, the investigators gathered evidence to build an indictment against those responsible for the Zolitūde tragedy. Finally, on December 8, 2015, the 9 accused were brought to trial. Construction engineer Ivar Sergets, architect Andris Kalinka, 2 construction inspectors, the head of construction at the Re&Re, 3 representatives of the Riga Construction Board, and an employee of the Maxima supermarket in charge of the safety procedures. After 2 months, the court delivered only one guilty verdict to Ivar Sergets for making, quote, gross errors in the structural calculations, which directly led to the collapse. For violating construction regulations and manslaughter due to negligence, Ivar Sergets was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The other defendants were acquitted of all charges. To support victims of the tragedy and their relatives, the state and city of Riga allocated more than 1.7 million euros. A charity organization provided a further 1.17 million euros. Finally, the Maxima Latvia chain of supermarkets allocated around 8 million euros. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.